welcome to today's Cultivating Success webinar on agritourism and safety. We're going to be talking about protecting visitors and your farm. We're really excited that you joined us today. This webinar series is brought to you by Cultivating Success, which is University of Idaho and Washington State University's Small Farms program. We jointly started this program in 2000, and today's webinar is going to cover agritourism in general, but then also talks about some specific liabilities related to Idaho and Washington State. Your speakers today are myself, Colette DePhelps. I'm an area extension educator with the University of Idaho. I'm located on the Moscow campus, and I focus on community food systems and small farms. And then we also have Jen Werlin, who is also a community food systems extension educator located in Teton County. This is the second of a four-part farm safety webinar series. So if you missed last week's webinar, it was focused on biosecurity on your small farm. And that webinar was recorded and is available from the Cultivating Success website. After this week's webinar, there's going to be a focus on children and then on food safety. So today we are really hoping that you leave the webinar with the ability to look at your farm or ranch and your agritourism enterprises through the lens of safety, and that you'll be inspired to utilize the resources provided to perform a safety assessment of your farm or ranch, make a safety plan, and mitigate any agritourism related liabilities that you might be encumbering from your agritourism enterprises. So we'll start off with an intro to agritourism, and then we'll delve into why does safety matter in agritourism enterprises. We'll talk about risk assessment, looking at different aspects of your farm and your enterprises. And then we're going to be delving into managing liabilities associated with agritourism enterprises and providing some resources. So to go ahead and get started, I'm going to hand the slide deck off to Jen Werlin, who's going to do an introduction to agritourism.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us. First of all, agritourism can be quite a profitable agricultural enterprise, and it can help you diversify your farm business. And we're going to broadly define agritourism, and that it's basically any agricultural activity that brings visitors to the farm or your ranch, or an activity in which consumers interact with farmers or ranchers. And it can generate significant income for the owner, especially depending on where you're located. And it's a place-based form of marketing. So there are several examples of agritourism. They could be direct-to-consumer sales, like selling at a farmer's market. So the farmer's market itself could be agritourism type of activity. Farm stands on your farm. It could be community-supported agriculture if people come to your farm and pick up your farm share. It could be set up as like an agricultural education enterprise. So having farm tours on your farm and workshops. It could also entail farm stays, having people stay overnight at your property, also including recreational opportunities and any type of entertainment or special events. So corn mazes are a popular activity, having hay rides or on farm, like farm to table dinners. And so first of all, why even agritourism? Why would you even do that? So of course it is another type of agricultural enterprise. It can definitely diversify and generate additional income for your enterprise and for your farm business. It also can create name recognition for your products, and it's a unique marketing opportunity. People get that connection of knowing their farmer. It educates consumers about agriculture and America's rural heritage. It also provides an opportunity to have customers purchase and get to know the producers, purchase locally made agricultural products, and get that connection, that direct connection. It can also help protect agricultural land and natural resources in areas with rapid land use changes. Here in the Tetons, we have really high land values, And a lot of our agricultural land is appraised at development value. So it makes it difficult for producers to purchase land or to even preserve agricultural land. And so this can be a tool to keep land in production and just one sort of enterprise that a producer could have. It also allows a different type of farm business. So it allows partners and family to stay on the farm. And this is especially pertinent with rapid land use change. And it can generate rural economic development opportunities by bringing tourists into towns to shop, eat, and stay. So there can be a ripple effect amongst your community. So first of all, just a few points to consider, like even if you want to start an agritourism enterprise, it will put your farm and you on public display. So do you even like interacting with customers and different kinds of people? Do you want people to be on your farm? Do you have a viable farm business and a plan that incorporates agritourism? So, to be considered agritourism and use that classification, you do have to promote and sell your farm products. So, there has to be that agricultural connection. And then you have to have correct zoning or allowable zoning. And you need to check into that before you start your business and your enterprise. Check into what permits you may need, any sort of licenses. That's all very important before you get started. And talk to your neighbors, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the next couple slides. And then also, do you have liability insurance? Do you have waivers? What are the potential hazards that may be on your farm? And the proximity to animals or equipment? Do you have adequate parking? So just like those logistical considerations are super important. And then just a real brief slide on the Idaho's Agritourism Promotion Act. This was actually adopted in 2013, and it defines like agritourism professional and inherent risks of agritourism. So these are like land conditions, animal behavior, equipment. These are all defined in legalese under this Idaho statute. And there's also one for Washington State and some of our nearby states. And failure to post proper signage. So this is a sign on the slide that's for Idaho specific. If you don't post these proper signs, that can prevent you from having immunity from liability. So even if you have insurance. So this is a definite requirement, and we can go over more of the legal requirements a bit later. And so mentioning like some of your due diligence when you're getting started, I mentioned this earlier, you want to try to be a good neighbor, try to avoid conflict with your neighbors, talk to them first, notify them when you're having events, invite them to come and attend maybe for free, create this rapport with them, and conflicts often arise without trust and understanding. So make sure you have the proper insurance, are following your county and your city laws, your rules, and your regulations. And then bring awareness to the Right to Farm Act. And this is the law that protects growers from court decisions based on customary noises, smells, dust, or other nuisances associated with farming. Try to be proactive about nuisance complaints to avoid possible conflicts with your neighbors. And just do that educational piece. And that's part of the beauty, I think, of agritourism is that you get those conversations, you get to know customers get to know you as the farmer, and you have that greater community connection to your rural heritage and agriculture in your community. So the next slides, Colette will go over.
Thanks, Jen. Okay, I'm going to start delving into why safety matters within agricultural enterprises. So, we all know that farms are environments that contain numerous health and safety hazards. They're businesses, they're operations where we're growing plants, we're raising animals, and we're also using a lot of equipment that is specialized for that type of business. So, there are inherent risks to having people come to your farm. And adults and children that don't have experience with farming or don't have experience with the type of farm that you operate may not be aware of the hazards that you consider to be obvious. And ultimately, we care. We care about people, we care about our animals, we care about the financial viability of our operation and our own business reputation and the reputation of agriculture overall. So, delving into safety and really considering safety on your farm not only protects your farm and the people who are visiting your farm, but it's also important for agriculture and agritourism overall. Within this sector, our personal reputations and the reputations of the other farms that are engaged in agritourism impact each other. So, encouraging you to do safety on your farm and you encouraging others that you partner with to have safe practices really raises all boats and the success of all your operations. In terms of youth specifically, annually, it's estimated that over 25 million youth visit farms. That's an incredible number of kids on farms, which is wonderful. So, as Jen said, coming to a farm is a great educational opportunity, and it's a great way to build support for agriculture and lifelong learning around agriculture. But every day, about 33 children are injured in ag-related incidents, and about 3 children die from ag-related injuries. And the majority of the injuries that are happening are not related to a child working on the farm. Between 2011 and 2020, agriculture led the number of occupational fatalities for youth 17 and under. And for non-working youth and visitors, animals are a leading source of injuries. So as you saw in the last two slides, animals are so attractive and often they are extremely engaging. However, your animals are used to you and not to your farm visitors, and so they can be a source of risk. So if we're looking overall at youth injuries on the farm and fatalities, we see that the top three causes of fatalities are interaction with farm machinery, motorized vehicles, particularly things like four-wheelers, these off-road vehicles, and then children drowning on the farm. We often have water on the farm. There might be ponds, might be located adjacent to rivers and streams, and those are highly risk inducing. Non-fatal injuries include falls, interactions with animals, and machinery and vehicles. So we're going to look at these in a little bit more depth when we talk about assessing risks. So we already talked about farm and ranch operators are responsible for the safety of farm visitors. You're also responsible for the safety and training of your farm workers. Each of your operations is different and you have your own unique health and safety hazards. So, as we're talking about assessing risks and mitigating risks on your farm, start thinking about your farm and how you might approach an assessment of your farm. The hazards that are associated with agritourism really depend on your activities. If you have more of a festival activity, so for instance, maybe you are having a harvest festival on your farm, you have a corn maze, you have seating areas that have hay bales, you're looking at vendors on your farm, the risks associated with that agritourism operation is going to be very different than the risks associated with a blueberry U-pick, where you are looking at food safety, but you're looking at it in a different way. You're looking at different areas of the farm because you have different activities going on during harvest. So it's going to be important that you identify the health and safety hazards on your farm, and then you look at how you can address those hazards and how you can mitigate them by creating barriers, by informing your workers and your customers about how to be safe on your farm. Some of the literature talks about farming not having, quote, accidents, because accidents are things that are haphazard. But when you really are looking at having an agricultural enterprise, you can mitigate risks and essentially really decrease accidents on the farm. So we're really encouraging you to create and implement a farm safety plan, that you'll do an assessment of your farm, and then you'll develop policies and procedures that impact the risks associated with your particular operation. Also, the hazards that are present on a farm and the safety strategies that you'll utilize to address those hazards are going to vary by your visitor's age and development. So, for example, children up to 8 years require constant supervision. What are your policies going to be about visitors on the farm and the number of adults that are required to supervise children on the farm? Children up to 5 can't fully understand dangers. You can talk about dangers, but cognitively, they don't understand what a danger is, how to identify it. So you're going to be really relying on adult supervisors and your staff to help guide children throughout the activities on your farm. Children 6 to 8 have really short attention spans, and they're curious about how things work, and they want to show adults that they can impress them. How many of you have seen children who are climbing up on something? Mom, Dad, look at me. Look how I can jump off of this. So when you're looking at your farm and you have hay bales are wonderful climbing structures for children up to 8 years. And oftentimes, children at home are used to being able to climb on things, to jump off them. And so you'll have to really establish how being on your farm and attending the activities on your farm is different than their home environment. Children that are from 9 to 10 really are moving into looking at independence, but they still don't fully understand consequences, and they start to take more risks. And by 13, they're really wanting to try out new skills without constant supervision. And so, again, thinking about the age of the visitors to your farm and the policies that you have around age is important as you move forward with your agritourism enterprise. And between the ages of 14 to 18, generally youth feel immortal and they become more and more likely to take risks. They're looking to impress their peers, but they are also starting to think abstract. And so they are able to follow more instructions and maybe require a little bit less supervision, but they require orientation, checking in, and explanation about why rules exist. So I want to give you an opportunity to reflect on a couple of statements, and in your mind, just identify, are these true or false? So let's go to number one. Children are naturally curious and unpredictable. Second, adults and chaperones realize the risks associated with ag operations. 3, posting warnings and rules adequately informs visitors of hazards. And 4, children and adults may not follow safety instructions. Okay, true. Children are naturally curious and unpredictable. They like to learn by doing. They like to get their hands in the dirt. They like to touch things and they like to explore. And that natural curiosity is amazing. And it's also something that you really need to consider when you're considering activities on the farm and how you're going to create safe farm experiences. Adults and chaperones realize the risks associated with ag operations. False. Oftentimes they don't. Even if they are operating a farm or ranch, they may not recognize the risks associated with your operations. And posting safety and warning signs does not adequately inform visitors of hazards. It's definitely important to post them, but it's also important to have oral orientations to think about your visitors and what their first language is, and to also use illustrations or pictures to convey your safety warnings and your rules. And it's true that children and adults may not follow safety instructions. It is so tempting to pet that goat. It's so tempting to feed that little animal. It's so tempting to go from the animal area into the next attraction without washing your hands. So you really need to have staff on site that are guiding people through your best practices on your farm and making sure that safety rules are followed. So let's talk a little bit about areas that you're going to want to evaluate on your farm or ranch. So traffic and pedestrian safety. How are you going to route traffic to your farm, and how are you going to protect people when they're walking around your farm? I'm going to delve into that a little bit more in more detail in a future slide. Think about surfaces, barriers, and storage areas. And how do surfaces change when your weather changes? On a nice dry day, maybe you don't have slick spots in your path, but you may have that if it's been raining. And how are you going to mitigate that slickness of those surfaces? Do you have barriers that keep people where you want them to be? And this is important not only for safety of your visitors, but also for safety of your crops and your livestock. So if you have people on your U-pick farm, do you have barriers that keep them out of the areas that you don't want them to pick? Or if you're having kids do a farm tour, how do you keep them on the path and out of your growing areas? Do you have adequate fencing to keep them away from animals? And can you lock up your storage areas so that you can put away hazards such as any type of pesticides, fertilizers, and tools that you have that might be mobile on your farm, that you can lock them away during your on-farm events? Machinery is also something to consider. I just talked about more handheld machinery, but when you're thinking about larger machinery, that might be an important attraction with your agritourism enterprise. Um, is your machinery parked on a level surface? Have you made sure that all your loaders, your three-point hitch attachments, and implements are lowered to the ground? That you have blocks on your wheels, your parking brake is on, and the keys are removed? If you're allowing people to access your cab of your harvester, like in this picture, um, do you have a way that they can do that safely? Are you directing them not to climb on the tire, to use the ladder or the stairs? Are you monitoring their access? Those are all different kinds of things that you need to think about, as well as making sure that you're covering sharp edges and doing an inspection to continually know that people are accessing the equipment safely. Ponds and water, again, drowning is a leading cause of death for children on the farm. And do you have some way to create a barrier to keep people away from ponds and water hazards? And do you have it clearly posted uh, that this is an area that is not okay to enter? Fire safety is another issue. And as we all know, in the West, we are having more and more fires, but fires can happen from equipment. If you have a parking area, is that grass mown short? Are you thinking about fire safety and uh, you have exit strategies? Do you have fire extinguishers on hand? Animal safety, again, looking at the safety of your animals and the safety of humans by creating separation and barriers. If you have any type of petting opportunities, are those safe? Are those animals in a situation where they're not overstressed? They're not over petted? Maybe they need a break. Are you really sure that you have the monitoring that those are not going to be a situation where somebody gets stepped on or accidentally bit or knocked over? So you really need to think about the size of the people who are going to be within that petting area and how to keep them safe. I'm going to delve into pest control, but this is definitely an issue that we need to consider on our farms, as well as food safety. And then there's this concept of attractive nuisances. So, an attractive nuisance is a place or an object on the farm that unintentionally attracts children and endangers their safety. So, you have to consider what's noticeable from a child's level. And then, can they access that area? So, you'll really need to secure areas to prevent access and regularly monitor them. So you can see in this picture that we definitely have a few attractive nuisances. So we have an area where ducks are penned, but oh my goodness, there is a swimming pool, and that is exciting. Kids love swimming pools and they recognize it right away. There is a fence barrier. It's an electric fence, but it could be likely that you turned your electric fence off so nobody would be shocked during your event. That is not a sturdy fence. Kids can go under it, kids could go over it. And then you can see, wow, there is a ladder. There's a ramp that takes me right up to the edge of that pool and a platform that maybe I could stand on, even though it's designed for ducks. I could climb up that ladder and stand on it. That's like thinking from the perspective of the child is really important when you're looking at your farm. So, how are you going to create barriers and monitor them so that these types of things are not available to children? And you may want to take the extra steps of removing the ramp and taking off the platform for your ducks during your event. So I suggest as you think about assessing your farm that you get a farm map. And one way you can do that is that you can go to Google, you can bring in the location of your farm, uh, zoom into that and use the terrain feature, and then you can just take a picture of your screenshot. So this is a picture of the WSU Organic Farm. You can see the roads where they can access coming into the farm. There's a little bit of a parking area that's grassy. You can see the different lanes. And then you can see over here that this is the bear enclosure. So hopefully that has a really good fence. So take a map and then explore your farm as your visitor would explore your farm. And then consider evolving your map into something that is directly related to your agritourism enterprise and includes directions to not only points of interest on your farm, places that people can go, but also where's first aid, where are the restroom facilities, where are the pickup and drop off points. So you can evolve your assessment map into your event map. So thinking about using a map, you might think about reenacting the experience that somebody is going to have on your farm from when they arrive to when they leave. So things to consider when people arrive is that do you have adequate and legal parking away from your attractions? Because that's where there's going to be a lot of movement. You're going to want to have designated parking areas. Do you have signage on the road that there's an event in progress and signage to those parking areas? Not only letting your visitors know where to park, but also letting passerbys know there's people here, maybe more people than you would normally expect. It's helpful to have people direct traffic, wearing reflective or brightly colored vests, and having designated drop-off and pickup areas. Consider posted speed limit and children present signs, as well as walking, driving, maintaining the roads and areas that people are going to access. And then consider accessibility for people with disabilities or limited mobility. If you're going to have things like perhaps a golf cart or some other transfer that you're going to have from the parking area for people with limited mobility. And how are you going to let people know about how accessible your farm is? I wanted to delve into a little bit about hand washing and food safety because a lot of the literature around hand washing says that you have to have warm water. And actually, recent research has shown that as long as you have potable water, so that's water that meets drinking water quality, and it's running, so it's running over your hand, not standing still, it doesn't have to be warm to be effective. But you do need to have soap. Hand sanitizer is not a replacement for a hand washing station. You cannot sanitize a dirty surface, and that includes your hands. So you're going to want to have hand washing stations throughout your facility, and especially outside of toilets, animal areas, and eating areas. With those setups, you don't have to have something that is hooked up to a hose. This is a great model of a hand washing station. So you have a container that has a spigot so you can have running water. There's soap available, and then you're going to want single-use towels. Those that could be paper towels, or those could be actually cloth towels, and a receptacle where those are going to go, and a water catch basin, because people are going to be washing germs, contaminants off their hands, and you don't want that to run off on your farm. So you can see here in this picture, the catch basin is a simple bucket. There's a trash can next to it, and there's actually a sign that provides hand washing instructions. So again, with food safety, you're going to want to have a hand washing station, but you're also going to want to have designated eating areas so people are not eating where your crops are, they're not eating where your animals are, and in your actual attractions like your corn maze. If you're going to allow smoking, you're going to want to have a safe smoking area and to have that posted, or if you're not allowing smoking or tobacco use on your farm, that is clearly conveyed to your visitors. You'll also want to consider rest areas that include shade or covering, because oftentimes we are having these types of activities when the weather is good, or maybe it's going to be a fall activity and you can't control the weather and it's going to be raining. So are there places that people can get out of extreme weather? And then if you are allowing food on the farm, you're selling food, or you're allowing vendors, uh, how are you going to look at following health department guidelines, including temperature control, and making sure that everyone has the correct licenses and permits? So I wanted to talk a little bit about barriers and fencing. Traditionally on farms, we have barriers and fencing that are appropriate to the activities that we're doing in terms of production. So we train animals to know that these electric fence lines are hot and to stay away. We have transitional areas where we might be bringing animals in for vaccinations, health checks, or transport. We might have movable fencing because we're looking at rotational grazing and moving our animals around the farm. And so that fencing is not at all sturdy. And we might again have other pens where we are keeping our animals, our horses. And oftentimes these are attractive nuisances because they are so fun to climb. And you might even climb over these fences at times instead of using the latch, because it's your farm, it's your operation, you know how to go through them. Your visitors won't, and it's going to need to be posted that these are off limits, and also that they're not something to climb. And so this could also be a place where somebody else has different rules on their own farm or ranch for their kids, and they might let their kids climb the fence. So how are you going to inform visitors of what your rules are? And how are you going to make sure that you, your family members, and your staff model those rules on the farm? So when we're thinking about barriers and fencing for agritourism enterprises, we're thinking about keeping visitors out, and also how to do that in a safe manner. So again, evaluating your fences and deciding where your access points are on your farm, what type of signage and orientation you need to those barriers, and really determining, are they going to keep visitors out? And then pest control. On a farm, oftentimes we think of pest control as pesticides or barriers that we are using mechanical or otherwise to keep pests out of our crops. But when we're thinking about an agritourism enterprise, we're really thinking about pests that could impact the visitors and their experience. So, standing water, pools, and insects reproduce. So, are ways that you can keep people away from standing water. You can mitigate those insects with some type of application, or you can drain those water areas. You're going to want to make sure that you continually scout to remove beehives and hornets' nests, that you keep grass short in any access areas that you think about things like snakes, rodents, other animals that might be in the grass. You're going to want to also exclude people from your wood and rock piles and from pets and neighboring animals. Pets are safe for you, but they could not be safe for your guests. And then, how do you want to exclude wild animals and then instruct guests on what to do if they see something that concerns them? Overall, it's going to be important that you and the volunteers and families on your farm understand the policies, goals, and procedures for keeping people safe at your operation, and that everybody is trained in your safety protocols. I underlined that people really need to model safety at all times. If you are modeling safety, then that tells your guest what's acceptable on your farm. So maybe you're doing things that aren't really in alignment with your safety protocols when you're on your regular day-to-day operation, you're jumping that fence, but don't jump it when people are on the farm. Make sure people are modeling the safety that you want them to practice. So consider training, but consider going beyond training. Involving your team in the safety assessments and developing the plan is hands-on training. They're going to see things that you may not see, especially if you have family on the farm and they're looking at the farm through a different lens, either through the lens of a youth or through the lens of a parent or through the lens of somebody that has a specific role on the farm and a different relationship with the equipment or the animals. So involve them in assessing the safety, developing the plan, and then reviewing those protocols. It's important that you have also systems for communication between your volunteers and your staff on your farm, that they know how to use the safety equipment on the farm and where it's located, and that you have an evacuation plan and keep records and reports. With the recording of this webinar, we're going to provide links to some really amazing training and assessment resources available on the safetourism.org website. There's interactive walkthroughs where they show you pictures of hazards and ask questions about mitigating those hazards. There's printable checklists that you can use to walk through your farm, identify what you're already doing well because you're probably doing a lot of things well, and then what needs to be corrected or addressed, and then create a timeline for that. And then there are specific agritourism resources that help you consider specific types of operations on your farm, like corn mazes and U-picks. So we'll make sure those are available to you on the Cultivating Success website. So with that, I want to go ahead and turn the slide deck over to Jen, and she's going to talk more about liability.
So for the next section, we're going to talk about the types of liability that you may face, how your state statute, so we'll be covering specifically Idaho and Washington, how that state statute protects you and where it may not, how to orient and inform visitors, the role of waivers, and what insurance you may actually need. So agritourism operators face lots of distinct categories of legal liability. So first, there's the premises liability, and that's when you invite the public onto your farm. You take on a duty of care, such as a landowner. The visitors are legal invitees, and that means that you owe them the highest duty of care. So you're doing that to maintain reasonably safe conditions. Wet walkways, unstable hay bales, unfenced machinery, and broken fencing all create premises liability exposure. Second, there's the negligence and gross negligence. category of liability. So standard negligence is failure to act as a reasonable person would. Pay attention to gross negligence. Both the Idaho Code and the Washington codes remove statutory immunity when a farm operator's conduct constitutes willful or wanton disregard for the safety of the participant. So this is legal speak. Examples include operating equipment at unsafe speeds near visitors, ignoring a known broken fence near animals, failing to fix a structural hazard you knew about. Third's product liability. So if you sell or serve food on farm, that's like examples are like you pick berries, apple cider, jam, having like a farm to table dinner, you take on product liability. This is separate from your activity or your premises liability, and it typically requires a separate endorsement on your or a policy change. And the farm, there's some farm visitor fact sheets also, and they will help give you liability policies that often do not cover food product risk. So that's its own policy as well. There's two additional categories worth mentioning. There's animal liability. So you could have, Colette talked about this at length. There, you could have injuries from livestock. You could have injuries from horses or petting zoo animals, even animals that are used to people. There's also liquor liability. So if you serve or sell alcohol at your events or on your farm, some state immunity laws explicitly exclude alcohol related claims. So there are agritourism statutes. I mentioned this earlier for the state of Idaho, and also Washington has one. The Idaho statute provides immunity for injuries or death resulting from inherent risks of agritourism. And we mentioned definitions of agritourism, but in Idaho code, it's pretty broad. And examples are like petting zoos, farm festivals, corn mazes, hay rides, barn parties, horseback riding. Sometimes people will have fishing on their farm, so they'll invite clients to come to their farm and fish. They'll allow camping. Some counties do allow that, where you can come to a farm and just camp and pop up a tent. Even if the farmer's not doing anything and it's just a separate thing, that's also part of it. There's a lot more. And these categories also include whether if a participant has paid for that activity. So whether or not they've paid, there is that immunity with that Agritourism Promotion Act. You have to have that sign, that warning sign. I showed that earlier today. You have to have that posted or you lose your protection. So it's really important. So get multiple copies. The required signage is simple, but it's legally required. So this is under Idaho law. There are risks associated with agritourism, which could lead to injury or death, and you are assuming those risks. And as Colette mentioned, people don't always read these signs. So it is one tool. In Washington, excuse me, it's similar to Idaho, but there are a few important differences. Washington adds a requirement that the warning sign must also appear in all written contracts with participants. So not signage. So when someone's signing a waiver, you need to have that also on that waiver. Washington specifically adds that operators lose immunity if they permit minor participants to use facilities or engage in activities not reasonably appropriate for their age. So that's the legal language. This is something that Idaho does not specifically address. And then Washington sign language, it reads, under Washington state law, there is limited liability for an injury to or death of a participant in an agritourism activity conducted at this agritourism location if such an injury or death results exclusively from the inherent risks of the agritourism activity. Both states require one, post the sign. You need that warning sign. Two, pleading assumption of risk as an affirmative defense. And three, avoiding gross negligence. So assume most visitors have never worked or spent time on a farm. For many people, this could be their first time ever going to a farm. There are some key practices to consider. There's a pre-visit practice. So before they even arrive, communicate clothing requirements. So having closed-toed shoes, no open-toed sandals. Make sure people are wearing long pants near machinery. Communicate what activities are planned and any age or health requirements. Also, setting these expectations ahead of time really can help you so much and reduce incidents. So make sure people take time to read the rules. You have a conversation with them before anything happens. So once they've arrived, you're going to want to have an arrival orientation. Conduct a brief, engaging orientation at check-in. So gather everybody up. It is recommended that you use engaging methods such as videos or tours to enhance understanding. So it's something that they want to pay attention to. Have a trained staff member present and point out any emergency exits, where people can stand, where they can go. Make it clear where the off-limit areas are located. Colette was talking about hand washing stations. Point out where, restrooms are, hand washing stations, and animal contact rules. So do that housekeeping orientation first. Then also ensure that you have the proper signs, and the signs throughout the property serve two purposes, both the visitor safety and legal protection. So you need to have those required state signs, but also you can have other signs as well. Make sure you have the Idaho and Washington required signage at the entrances, and also post additional directional and safety signs throughout your farm and where you expect your clientele to go and your visitors to go. For animals and having contact with animals, it's recommended to maintain at least 30 to 50 feet between visitors and animal housing areas when possible. Have those barriers set up. Supervise any areas that, like if you're having a petting zone, make sure you have that hand washing station before and after contact and make that clear that people should be washing their hands. And this also reduces zoonotic disease risk. And then make sure you have an emergency plan. So this is the incident response and that emergency plan. Keep your first aid kits stocked, know where they're located. Make sure that the staff fill out any sort of incident reports for an injury or property damage, even minor ones, even if it's like, oh, I just skinned my knee, I need to clean my knee up and I need a band-aid. So you still need to document that. And this is critical if a claim arises months later. So there are a lot of resources out there. We really like safeagritourism.org, and that will provide a free checklist, and signage templates. And then make sure you have daily inspections. So walk your property, do this before you open it up, and keep your documentation of safety strategies handy, know where that's located, and that helps your insurance company understand and support your operation. All right, so waivers. Many agritourism operators assume that having visitors sign a waiver fully protects them. The reality is that this is more nuanced and waivers can often be thrown out in court. So, a written waiver or a release of liability form is the traditional tool for addressing liability for voluntary engagement in risk-based activities, like those involved in agritourism. Still recommend we do it. But a waiver is that participants' recognition that they are assuming the risk of the activity, and it contains a promise to release the activity provider from liability for ordinary negligence or inherent risks. So, what the waivers accomplish are they communicate specific risks clearly to participants before participation. They document that the visitor understood and accepted those risks. They can also deter claims. So if a participant fills it out, that can help be a deterrent for a claim. An attorney evaluating a potential lawsuit will consider whether a valid waiver was signed. And some insurance providers do require waivers. What they do not do is that they can't prevent someone from filing a lawsuit. They can't provide gross negligence or willful misconduct. Courts will consistently invalidate that. And waivers for minors are very limited. And they're especially limited when they come to activities that resemble employment, so such as harvesting and alcohol related events. And guardian signatures for minors have reduced enforceability and vary by state. In terms of how waivers relate to state statutes, in Idaho, the immunity statute may reduce the need for waivers for inherent risk activities. But if your farm offers activities that fall outside the state's statute definition, the waivers do help to fulfill or fill some of that gap. And in Washington, the warning sign must also appear in that written contract. We've mentioned this before. This creates a built-in consent element in your contracts. And so some practical tips are that you want to make sure an attorney looks this over and it drafts activity-specific waivers. So work with that attorney. Don't use just generic ones. For high volume events, consider the ticket back approach. This is like if you're getting a ticket and people are giving you that at the entrance, you want to put that on the back of the ticket. And you can also require it when people purchase the ticket. And then for school groups, we have this in our county sometimes. You want to make sure that you get permission slips signed and that you coordinate that with the school district ahead of time. And that is required before entry. And review your waivers with your insurance provider annually. So not just with an attorney. You have that conversation with your insurance provider. And so the bottom line is that waivers are just one layer of protection. They don't replace for safety practices, statutory compliance, or insurance. So next we'll talk a little bit about some insurance. And this is actually a really important slide. The key message is that your existing farm policy almost certainly doesn't cover agritourism visitors. So critical first step is that before you open your farm to the public or before you add any new activity, call your insurance agent and disclose exactly what you're doing, and what isn't disclosed may not be covered. So make sure you cover your bases. And you can get commercial general liability, and this is core coverage that you need for visitor injuries and property damage. And it may be needed, you may need a separate commercial policy or an added endorsement to your farm owner policy. So yeah, making that phone call is so important ahead of time. Verify your policy covers your specific activities and the number of visitors expected annually. And then note that homeowner coverage may not apply, or it may apply. It just depends. And you may need to check your policies with that. But most, depending on the state, there are some homeowner coverages that will are out there, and they're usually not adequate for agritourism. So you need that special endorsement. So leading us to that agritourism endorsement. Many carriers now offer this as an add-on to your existing farm policy. It's starting to be more popular. It does cover on-farm entertainment activities not considered part of normal farming. So if you're having a special event, and you need to be very explicit about those activities, and the policies can vary by insurer. Farm Bureau Financial Services notes that not all companies provide identical coverage, and one insurer may cover activities that another excludes. So be specific, and it's not uniform between the insurance carriers. There's also product liability, and this is like if you're selling jam or produce, a baked good or apple cider, or you're serving an on-farm dinner, you need this. And general liability policies don't cover farm food product claims. And general liability policies also don't cover product liability. For workers' comp, this is another requirement. This is required when you have employees involved in agritourism operations. So you're going to need to check specifically with your insurance about the state. There are differences from state to state about that. And then there's event liability. So if you have like a one-time event there, that can sometimes be a good option if it's just not a regular activity. And it could be a lower cost option for operators hosting only seasonal events. So this is typically between 1 or 5 times a year. And there's usually some alternatives to year-round commercial coverage for occasional use. And then liquor liability, this is where those waivers were really tricky as well. So if you're having a winery or a cidery or any sort of like event where you're serving alcohol, this is essential to have this liquor liability. And it's often explicitly excluded from farm and then the just usual general liability policies. Some agritourism immunity statutes also exclude alcohol-related claims, and I'm not quite sure about Idaho and Washington, so you'll need to check on that. And then make sure you have proper documentation of safety strategies. So these include the safety policies. Make sure everyone's oriented, that your staff, that you have documentation of your inspections, animal records, permits, and make sure you have photos to document with that. And that also can help your insurance company understand and support your operation. And it's also important for defending claims. Few questions. Ask your agent, does your current policy cover agritourism visitors? What specific activities are covered or excluded? Do I need a commercial policy or or some sort of agritourism endorsement? Will that suffice? And what documentation do you require from me as a owner of the farm? And are there activities that require separate coverage entirely? So some key takeaways. You need to make sure you have that statutory compliance first. Safety is a foundation, so make sure you have all that documentation, the waivers, the insurance policies. Waivers are just one layer of protection. Insurance is absolutely critical. Make sure your policy explicitly covers agritourism, and get professional help. You can work with an agricultural attorney and an insurance agent, and make sure they understand farm and agritourism operations. And then agritourism is a valuable opportunity economically and educationally. Managing liability well lets you focus on what matters, connecting people to agriculture. So that's it for my slides. I'll stop my share there. And Colette has some resources to share with you as well. So There are the integrating safety into agritourism resources. I mentioned this before. There's that safeagritourism.org. Colette, do you want to talk about some of the other ones?
Um, yes, thanks, Jen. CultivateSafely.org is provided by the National Farm Medicine Center. It has a lot of resources specifically when you're thinking about child safety on your farm. Again, checklists, brochures, some of those statistics that I talked about, and then some very specific resources for farmers, ranchers, and for supervisors. So we will have these all linked with the recording on the Cultivating Success website. I want to remind you that next week we're going to be having a webinar that is going to focus specifically on children and family safety on small acreage operations. And then our final webinar in this year's series is small farm food safety, really looking at deciphering rules, regulations, and basic good practices on your farm. So if you have any questions about upcoming webinars, please let us know. Otherwise, thank you so much for participating today. And again, everything will be posted on the Cultivating Success website in the next couple of days. So thanks for joining us today.